Good morning, y'all. I want to begin with something I almost never do in a forecast. I want to begin with an apology. Not an apology for anything I got wrong meteorologically, not a retraction of previous guidance or correction of a forecast that failed to verify. An apology for the timing. Because what I am about to tell you, what the models have produced in the last 6 hours that has fundamentally and dramatically changed the character of this week's forecast, is information that I wish I had been able to give you 48 hours ago, 72 hours ago, with more preparation runway, with more time between the information and the event. Because the preparation that the forecast I'm about to deliver demands is preparation that takes time to execute properly, and the time available to execute it has just gotten shorter at exactly the moment the forecast has gotten more intense. That is the apology, not for the meteorology, for the gap between when the atmosphere decided to show us what it is doing and when the preparation window closes. That gap is narrower this morning than it was yesterday morning. And I want to make sure every second of the preparation window that remains is used effectively by every community in the path of what is now developing. So let me give you the forecast with everything I have right now, without softening and without hedging, because the time for gradual escalation of the public messaging has passed, and the time for full, immediate, unambiguous communication of what the models are showing has arrived. Here is what just changed. Here is why it matters. And here's exactly what you need to do about it in the hours you have left. The change that has made this forecast way more intense arrived in the most recent model run. The run completed in the last 6 hours, in a form that every operational meteorologist who looks at it is going to recognize immediately as the specific kind of forecast shift that demands immediate escalation of public communication. It is not a small adjustment. It is not a refinement of existing guidance toward a slightly more aggressive solution. It is a step change, a discontinuous jump in the forecast solution that represents not the models progressively resolving a known feature with improving accuracy, but the models capturing a new feature, a feature that was not present in the previous runs, that has emerged from the atmospheric initial conditions with a suddenness that the modeling community specifically watches for as a marker of rapid atmospheric development happening in real time rather than in the forecast period. That feature is a secondary surface low that has developed overnight along the warm front of the primary cyclone system, approximately 300 miles northeast of the primary low center in a position that the previous model runs did not anticipate, and that the current run is depicting with a clarity and an intensity that leaves no room for the interpretation that it is a modeling artifact. Secondary surface, low development along warm fronts is not unusual in strong extratropical cyclone events. What is unusual, what makes this secondary low the feature that has changed everything, is its position, its intensity, and the atmospheric environment it is developing within. It is positioned directly over the corridor of maximum Gulf moisture convergence. It is deepening at a rate, 18 millibars in 12 hours in the most recent run, that qualifies as bombogenesis by the standard meteorological definition. And it is deepening into an atmospheric environment with CAPE values of 5,000 to 6,000 joules per kilogram and 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity values of 400 to 600 joules per square meter. A secondary surface low undergoing bombogenesis in a 6,000 joule CAPE, 600 joule per square meter SRH environment is not a forecast complication. It is a forecast emergency. And it is what the last 6 hours of model output have produced. Let me explain why the secondary low changes the forecast so dramatically, because the mechanism is specific and important, and understanding it is understanding why the intensity jump in this forecast is real rather than model noise. The primary surface low, the feature that previous model runs had been consistently depicting and that the forecast community had been building its guidance around, was forecast to track from southwestern Oklahoma northeastward through Kansas and into Iowa over the course of the event. That track produced a severe weather setup of the character I described in recent forecasts. Significant, potentially major, carrying a real tornado and flood threat across the primary corridor. The warm front, extending northeast from that primary low, was a secondary focus area, as warm fronts always are in significant cyclone events, but the primary severe weather action was anchored to the primary low's track corridor. The secondary low changes that geometry completely. A secondary low developing along the warm front creates a new surface convergence zone, a new focus for moisture transport, instability development, and shear enhancement that is separate from and in addition to the primary low's forcing. Its CU creates a surface boundary complex of extraordinary complexity, with the primary lows cold front, the primary lows warm front, the secondary low zone circulation, and the interaction zones between all three producing a web of surface boundaries that, in the extreme instability and sheer environment of this event, are individually and collectively capable of producing significant tornado activity. Multiple simultaneous tornado-producing surface boundaries, each independently capable of outbreak-level severe weather, all operating simultaneously in the same extreme atmospheric environment, within a geographic corridor that encompasses tens of millions of people. That is what the secondary low has introduced into this forecast. That is why the forecast just got way more intense. The tornado threat from the secondary low interaction is where the most dramatic intensity jump in this forecast is concentrated, and I want to give you the specific parameter values that the most recent model run is producing for the secondary low circulation environment, because those values are the numbers that justify the alarm I am communicating. The secondary low is developing along the warm front in a position that the models are now depicting as the zone of maximum low-level wind shear enhancement for the entire event, a position where the backing of surface winds ahead of the secondary low's circulation reinforces the already extreme backing associated with the primary low's warm sector to produce 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity values of 500 to 700 joules per square meter in a corridor stretching from western Tennessee through western Kentucky and into southern Indiana and Ohio. 500 to 700 joules per square meter in a 5,000 to 6,000 joule Cape environment. The significant tornado parameter values in the secondary low circulation corridor are in the 18 to 25 range in the most recent model output, 18 to 25. I have given you the historical context for these values in previous forecasts. The climatological mean STP for EF5 proximity soundings is approximately 4.5. The highest values observed in the proximity of the most violent tornadoes in the modern record are in the range of 12 to 15. The values the most recent model run is producing for the secondary low's circulation corridor exceed the highest observed values in the historical EF5 proximity sounding database. These are not parameters that the standard severe weather vocabulary is adequate to describe. They are parameters that belong in the conversation about the absolute physical ceiling of what the atmosphere is capable of producing over the continental United States. Please treat your shelter preparation with the full weight of what that sentence means. The geographic implications of the secondary low for the tornado threat footprint are the dimension of this forecast change that I want to make sure is communicated with maximum clarity, because the secondary low has shifted the zone of highest tornado potential in a direction that puts communities in its path that were not in the primary risk corridor of the previous forecast guidance. The primary low's track corridor, the southwestern Oklahoma through Kansas through Iowa corridor, remains a high risk area and remains inside the severe weather setup. But the secondary low's circulation corridor, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, southern Indiana, southwestern Ohio, has emerged in the last 6 hours as potentially the highest risk area of the entire event. The highest significant tornado parameter values in the most recent model output are not over Oklahoma. They are over Tennessee, they are over Kentucky, they are over Indiana. Communities in those states that were in the moderate risk category of yesterday's forecast are in the extreme risk category of today's forecast. Communities in those states that have severe weather culture, calibrated to occasional significant events rather than to the absolute ceiling of atmospheric tornado production, are now inside a forecast environment that is depicting parameter values at or above the absolute ceiling of atmospheric tornado production. The preparation gap, the difference between the preparation those communities currently have in place and the preparation this forecast demands, is the most dangerous gap in this event. And the time available to close it is measured not in days but in hours. Please, if you are in western Tennessee, western Kentucky, southern Indiana, or southwestern Ohio, please treat this forecast change with the full urgency of what the parameter values. I have just described demand. Your shelter plan needs to be executed today. Y'all call needs to be on every phone in your household today. The preparation window is closing, and it is closing faster than the public awareness of this forecast change is spreading. The overnight dimension of the secondary low's tornado threat is where I want to spend the most focused time, because the secondary low is developing along the warm front in a position that places its highest intensity circulation corridor directly over the Ohio Valley during the overnight and pre-dawn hours. The exact timing and geography that produces the highest fatality rates per tornado in the historical severe weather record. Western Tennessee at midnight, western Kentucky at 2 in the morning, southern Indiana at 4 in the morning, southwestern Ohio at 6 in the morning, the progressive overnight eastward movement of the secondary low's circulation corridor through the most vulnerable geographic and temporal window for tornado. Fatalities is the specific feature of this forecast change that I find most alarming, and that I want to make sure every community in that corridor understands before the sun goes down tonight. QLCS tornadoes embedded in the squall line that the secondary low organizes, tornadoes that develop in 3 to 5 minutes or less, that produce warning lead times shorter than the time it takes a sleeping household to achieve full low. Wakefulness that arrive in communities whose severe weather culture is calibrated to a lower threat level than the one this forecast is now depicting are going to be moving through the Ohio Valley overnight. The only preparation that reliably bridges the gap between a sleeping household and a 3-minute warning lead time is y'all call. It calls your phone. It rings through everything. It gets you moving before you are fully conscious of why you are moving, which in a 3-minute warning lead time environment is exactly the mechanism that saves lives. $14.95 for a full year. Link in the description. Please set it up on every phone in every household in the Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio corridor before the sun goes down tonight. Please do not go to sleep tonight in that corridor without y'all call active. Please. The rainfall and flash flooding implications of the secondary low are the second major intensity escalation that the last 6 hours of model output have produced. And they deserve the same level of directness and urgency as the tornado discussion. The secondary low developing along the warm front creates a new, intense moisture convergence zone, a focused band of extreme atmospheric moisture flux that is separate from and in addition to the primary low's moisture transport corridor. The two moisture convergence zones, one associated with the primary low's warm conveyor belt and one associated with the secondary low's circulation, overlap in the Tennessee Valley and the lower Ohio Valley in a way that produces precipitable water values in that overlap zone of 2.3 to 2.6 inches. 2.6 inches of precipitable water is not a mid-latitude atmospheric moisture content. It is a tropical moisture content. It is the moisture content found in the core of a landfalling tropical storm. Finding it in the warm sector of a secondary surface low undergoing bombogenesis over the Tennessee Valley is an atmospheric condition that the rainfall rate equations of standard hydrological forecasting are not calibrated to handle accurately because those equations were parameterized on moisture contents that do not typically reach 2.6 inches in this geographic location at this time of year. The actual rainfall rates in the heaviest convective bands within the two moisture convergence zone overlap area are going to exceed the model. Predicted rates because the models are working at the edge of their calibration range, 3 to 4 inch per hour rainfall rates. Rates that are more typical of the eye wall of a landfalling hurricane than of a mid-latitude severe weather event are realistic in the most intense convective cores over the Tennessee Valley and lower Ohio Valley. 3 to 4 inch per hour rainfall rates on soil that is already saturated from 3 weeks of preceding events into river systems already at or above flood stage, in an overlap zone where two separate moisture convergence zones are simultaneously depositing their precipitation, produce flash flooding that develops not in hours but in minutes, and that reaches depths not in inches but in feet within the time it takes to watch a television program. Please evacuate flood-prone areas in the Tennessee Valley and lower Ohio Valley before tonight. Please do not wait for the water to tell you it is time to go. By the time the water is telling you it is time to go, the roads that allow you to go may already be gone. The straight-line wind threat from the squall line that the secondary low organizes has also intensified dramatically in the most recent model output, and I want to address it specifically because the secondary low's position along the warm front produces a rear inflow jet that is aimed differently than the rear inflow jet of the primary low's squall line, aimed in a direction that brings the most intense straight-line wind gusts into the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic rather than the traditional Southern Plains corridor. The rear inflow jet associated with the secondary low is being forecast at 70 to 90 mile per hour surface gusts across the broad swath of the Ohio Valley squall line corridor, with isolated gusts of 90 to 100 and 10 miles per hour in the most intense bow echo segments. That wind threat, arriving overnight into communities that are simultaneously managing the QLCS tornado threat from the same squall line, creates a compound hazard management challenge that emergency management agencies in the Ohio Valley are going to be navigating in real time with degraded resources. Because the 3 weeks of preceding events have consumed mutual aid resources and exhausted crews in ways that reduce the effective response capacity for this event relative to what it would be after an equivalent event arriving in isolation. The power outages from the secondary low's squall line wind event are going to be extensive, are going to arrive overnight when restoration crews cannot safely operate, and are going to accumulate on top of the still incomplete restoration from the previous events in the sequence. Please prepare for 7 to 14 days without power in the Ohio Valley corridor. Please ensure every medically vulnerable person in your circle has a plan that accounts for that duration. The hail threat from the secondary low's supercell environment has the same intensity escalation character as the tornado and rainfall threats. And I want to address it briefly, but specifically, because the secondary low's position has shifted the maximum hail size corridor in a way that puts the Tennessee Valley and the lower Ohio Valley inside the largest expected hail sizes rather than the southern plains. The 5,000 to 6,000 joule Cape environment in the secondary low's warm sector supports updraft intensities that produce hailstones of 4 to 6 inches diameter, softball to orange sized, within the strongest storm cores. The communities from Nashville through Louisville through Cincinnati that are now inside the secondary low's primary storm corridor need to treat the vehicle and property protection guidance with the same urgency as the tornado shelter guidance, because the hail that this environment is capable of producing is not cosmetic damage hail. It is structural damage hail. Please get your vehicles under cover before this afternoon. Please assess any roofs in your household that sustained marginal damage in the previous events in this sequence, because marginally damaged roofs in the path of 4 to 6 inch hail are not going to survive this event. Here is your preparation directive, and I want to give it to you with the specific acknowledgement that the time available to execute it is shorter than it should be, and that every action on this list needs to happen today. Not tonight, not tomorrow morning, today. Identify your tornado shelter and execute it today. Every household in the Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio corridor, every household in the Oklahoma through Kansas corridor, every household in the broader ensemble, spread footprint. Set up y'all call on every phone in every household today. This is the single most important preparation action for the overnight tornado threat from the secondary lows corridor, and it is available to everyone in the affected area for $14.95 with a link in the description of this video. Evacuate flood-prone areas in the Tennessee Valley and lower Ohio Valley today. Before the rainfall begins, before the river stages begin their final rise, before the roads that allow evacuation become the roads that are underwater. Get every vehicle under cover today. Replenish every supply depleted by the previous events. Assess every pre-existing damage vulnerability in your home. Have every vulnerable family member conversation. Check on every neighbor. And please share this forecast immediately and urgently with every person in your life in the affected corridor, particularly in Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio, because the forecast change that has made this so much more intense happened in the last 6 hours, and the public awareness of that change is running far behind the atmospheric reality that produced it. The gap between what the atmosphere is now showing and what the public currently understands about this week is the most dangerous gap in this event. Please help close it. I'm going to be live from the first storm initiation through the last flood crest across the full event duration. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see y'all in the live stream. I love every single one of you. The forecast just got way more intense. Please make sure your preparation gets way more intense to match. Stay safe out there.